Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. In the autumn, as the days grow shorter, as the light wanes, as much of nature indulges us with a last kaleidoscopic splash before its more muted hibernation, there's a certain spiritual impulse to reflect more deeply, more straightforwardly on our mortality. In All Saints, All Souls observances and Dia de los Muertos observances, such impulses take shape in rituals of one kind and another. We here have for years, honoring such wisdom from the world's religious traditions, held our own Memorial Sunday service at this time of the year. It offers us an opportunity to remember and to celebrate those whom we have loved and lost. I invite you, as today's service begins, to call to your mind someone in particular who you loved and who has died, whether in the past year or previously. Think of someone important in your life. Someone who left an indelible imprint on you and whose loss, whether recent or distant, remains with you. Now call to mind others who share in your grief. Imagining your lost loved one, perhaps at the center of a circle, surrounded by those who loved and now miss them. Pause briefly. Breathe in these blessed memories in silence. Welcome all, visitor and member alike. As we prepare to sing, please silence your electronic devices, and as you rise in body and or spirit, offer a quiet welcome to someone near you.
this flame, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, we welcome grief into the room, that we might sit together and feel what we have lost, and in this company find some measure of comfort.
Our first reading is by the contemporary U.S. Pacific Northwest-based poet Matthew Dickman. Even though it's a poem called Grief, you'll hear, I hope, his playfulness with the notion. When grief comes to you as a purple gorilla, you must count yourself lucky. You must offer her what's left of your dinner. The book you were trying to finish, you must put aside. And make her a place at the foot of your bed, her eyes moving from the clock to the television and back again. I am not afraid. She has been here before. And now I can recognize her gait as she approaches the house. Some nights, when I know she's coming, I unlock the door, lie down on my back, and count her steps from the street to the porch. Tonight she brings me a pencil and a ream of paper, tells me to write down every one I have ever known. And we separate them between the living and the dead, so she can pick each name at random. I play her favorite Willie Nelson album because she misses Texas. But I don't ask why. She hums a little. The way my brother does when he gardens. We sit for an hour while she tells me how unreasonable I have been, crying in the checkout line, refusing to eat, refusing to shower, all the smoking and all the drinking. Eventually, she puts one of her heavy purple arms around me, leans her head against mine, and all of a sudden, things are feeling romantic. So I tell her things are feeling romantic. She pulls another name, this time from the dead, and turns to me in that way that parents do, so you feel embarrassed or ashamed of something. Romantic, she says, reading the name out loud, slowly. So I am aware of each syllable, each vowel, wrapping around the bones like new muscle, the sound of that person's body. And how reckless it is, how careless that his name is in one pile and not the other.
Welcome to today's service. Whether you are here in this room, in our alternative worship space in the Bernstein Room, watching this service by way of live stream, or viewing a video archive of this service. We're honored to have guests with us here today. Our members would like to greet you following the service. So that we might do so, if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, please take note of guests seated near you. After the service, invite them to join you for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance of the sanctuary. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place your completed card in an offering basket when they are passed later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. You'll find them, along with offering envelopes, at the end of your row on clipboards. Please begin passing them down your row now. Some returning visitors may be interested in hearing about how to become a member. If so, talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome. Here are a few of the upcoming ways to engage with our congregation. After today's service, if you find yourself in need of some comfort food, you will be in luck because our middle school class has prepared a brunch that they will be serving after the service. It's a great way to get to know some of our congregation's middle schoolers and one another better. Tomorrow night at 6:30, we will have the third installment of our immigration speaker series. We'll hear from a local nonprofit, Our Bridge, about the injustices facing newly arrived immigrant and first-generation children here in Charlotte. And this Wednesday at 6:30, there's an opportunity for families with one or more children in 2nd through 5th grade, plus siblings of all ages, to spend time together here and learn a little bit more about why the chalice is the symbol of our faith. If you're looking for more opportunities to get engaged here, please read through your order of service, explore our website, or subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, Currents. We take a moment now to reflect on our concerns for our world and our community. This morning, together, we are sitting with grief, remembering again that grief and healing, pain and joy are part of the same story. Since each of us is experiencing a different part of the story, it's our coming together that makes the narrative of grief whole. This week, our Jewish neighbors at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh finished burying their loved ones. In the midst of anguish and disbelief, memories of lives well lived were lifted up, and love and respect were shared. We hold them in prayer and all people around the world and close to home who find themselves mourning in the wake of violence. In our own congregation, it has been a week of joy and healing and grief. We celebrate with Mary Lepresti and Tom Brooke upon their marriage and family dedication of their 2 children, Juniper and Rowan. We celebrate with Debbie and Tommy George upon the marriage of their son, Dylan. We're sending love to Felix Mockler in their time of concern for their Uncle Eric's health. We hold with love Sheila and Jim Lay as Sheila rests and recovers after recent surgery. And on this Memorial Sunday, we hold with love and in prayer people in our congregation who are grieving. Margie Storch and her family are in our prayers as she mourns the loss of her aunt, Diana Gleesner. We are sending love to Joshua Surratt and his extended family and community as they mourn the death of Joshua's cousin, Brandon Thomas. We mourn the very recent death of our beloved member, Carolyn Lord, and send love to her husband, Kurt, their 4 children, family, and friends in their time of grief. Carolyn's memorial service will be held here on Tuesday at 3 p.m. We mourn the death of another beloved member, Hannah Miller, this week, and send love to her family and many friends within and beyond this congregation in their time of loss. We hold each of you in our prayers. Grief and healing, pain and joy are part of the same story. It is our coming together that makes the narrative whole. If you are carrying a joy or sorrow today that is particularly meaningful in your life, later in the service, when the offering baskets are being passed and music is being played, you are invited, visitor and member alike, to come forward and light a candle in silence. Here is a poem entitled Grief by Barbara Crooker. Grief is a river you wade in until you get to the other side. But I am here, stuck in the middle, water parting around my ankles, moving downstream over the flat rocks. I'm not able to lift a foot, move on. Instead, I'm going to stay here in the shallows with my sorrow, nurture it like a cranky baby, rock it in my arms. I don't want it to grow up, go to school, get married. It's mine. Yes, the October sunlight wraps me in its yellow shawl, and the air is sweet as a golden tokay. On the other side, there are apples, grapes, walnuts, and the rocks are warm from the sun. But I'm going to stand here, growing colder until every inch of my skin is numb. I can't cross over. Then you really will be gone.
Poet Matthew Dickman, in words you heard earlier, imagines grief as a purple gorilla who likes Willie Nelson, misses Texas, and hums a little. For poet Barbara Crooker, in words you heard earlier, grief is like a river you wade in, with flat rocks, shallows, October sunlight, and numbing cold. Denise Levertov pictures grief as a dog one coaxes out from under the porch and into the comfort of the house. For Mark Doty, grief is like white roses on the beach, only a little denser than fog. And Kevin Young imagines grief as a tide, taking a lost loved one away and then back again. How is it for you? In your heart, in your soul, in your life, what's grief like? Casting about for some image, some metaphor, some way to put that feeling into words or pictures. What comes to mind? Dickman's gorilla, Crooker's river, Levertov's dog, each is a vibrant image. But I gravitate more toward Doty's beach roses, shadow-centered petals, blurring toward the edges, into everything, beside the foaming hymn of shore, brave waxen candles. And to Kevin Young's tide, rising and falling with presence, absence, presence, absence. In my first semester in college, while playfully kicking a soccer ball with some kids who had wandered onto a field near my dorm, I slipped and gouged a sizable chunk out of my left leg on a broken bottle carelessly thrown onto the field. It opened a gaping, gushing wound, one crudely closed by an emergency room doctor's deft stitching. To this day, decades later, it remains tender, a scarred indention that when hit still shivers me with pain. Grief, by my way of it, is like that. Grief is tender, delicate, never hardened, even old grief, even the grief of many years. Grief may in time scab and scar over, but it remains even yet so prone to pain. Some wayward blow, some even nudging glance, and the old hurt flares up all over again. Try as we might to guard against such jolts, grief seems so vulnerable, so exposed. Perhaps in part it is thinking of grief as tender fragility that causes me also to imagine it as a young child. Less an infant than a somewhat unruly toddler, wandering about with that unsteady gait into all kinds of problematic situations. Grief is prone to showing up unexpectedly, acting out, calling attention to itself, like it or not. My beloved friend of many years, who was to have been my friend well into our old age, instead, at the end of the slow unraveling of his mind, died. He drifted and drifted ever further away until he was caught in a current and carried under forever. In his place, his no one to take his place in my life place, I felt such a weary, resigned sadness. I did not want it, this grief. I was tired and angry and busy, and I just wanted the grief to go away and stay away. So I avoided it, set out no trespassing signs around my heart, and plunged back into my days, determined that that was that. Only it wasn't. And it isn't. Instead, that clumsy, cumbersome grief showed up and shows up still, unbidden, summoned back by the most prosaic of small senses. You know how a smell, a certain simple smell, can send us tumbling? A whiff of, well, in my beloved's case, of scotch. That peaty, sharp whiskey aroma. or a few bars of a jazz riff, music to which I introduced him and which he grew to love, or an old vignette shaken loose of a particular run, of a particular meal, that special night in Napa, followed the next morning by Beethoven on the long drive to Yosemite. And there it is. That grief, as tender as an old wound, hobbling and humbling me all over again. I have discovered what I should have known, what many of you here know all too well: resisting, avoiding grief never really works. Grief, like a rambunctious child, wanders at will into serene and orderly settings, refusing to be ignored. It shows up uninvited and seems completely unconcerned with any disruption that it may cause. Dickman's purple gorilla, who appears again one night, putting her heavy purple arms around us. Crooker's numbing river, where we find ourselves again stuck in the middle, water parting around our ankles. And what are we to do? What are we to do? It has only lately occurred to me that those poignant poets may be on to something. On to a kind of truth better told in verse than in prose, far more art than science. What if we were to imagine that grief is not some ominous force lurking in the shadows of our lives, but rather a necessary, dare I say, welcomed part of what it means to be alive? What if grief shows up not to undermine or overwhelm us, but to remind us? To remember us to the life of one we loved and only thought we'd lost completely? What if grief's unruly arrival signals to us that love's truest bonds aren't ever really severed, not even by death? What if grief's tender fragility can serve to remind us that grief and loss are not the same thing? That grief may even be loss's counterweight. The reminder that the life we lose, even in death, lives on within us. If we could imagine grief, gorilla, river, rose, or child, as a gift, then we might even welcome it, make a place for it, nurture and care for it. We might take this tender gift into our arms, hold it closely against our breast, offering it solace, sanctuary. Come, grief. Make your home in my heart. Speak to me of what is yet to be cherished. Sing in my heart of compassion's stirrings. Bring with you grief's sights, sounds, smells, memories of plenty. Make real again his voice. His laugh. His smile. His touch. Mend the frayed strands. Weave them ever more tightly into my life. My arms, my home, my heart opens to you, grief. No longer are you intruder, trespasser. May you now be welcomed, honored guest. For you, grief, you come bearing the beloved, back once more like a tide, forever lured by lunar seduction. Let us go then on our way, grief, you and me together. No longer in enmity, but in love. Welcome. Come in, grief. Make of my heart, my tender, fragile, wounded heart. Make of my heart your home. Let us enter together into the compassionate, respectful silence of meditation. Poet Charles Wright affirms, "The dead are constant in the white lips of the sea. Over and over through clenched teeth, they tell their story. The story each knows by heart. Remember me. Speak my name. When the moon tugs at my sleeve, when the body of water is raised and becomes the body of light, remember me. Speak my name." So now we name our beloved dead, especially those who have died in this past year. We begin by acknowledging our awareness that for some, loss this year came in the form of the death of a beloved pet. We don't have the same social constructs with which to recognize such loss. But those who lost a special pet feel the very real pain of grief. I invite you to name those particular losses, the names of pets you lost this year, aloud or in the silence of your heart. In addition to these, our pets, many of us lost family members and special friends this year. We speak their names aloud or in the silence of our hearts with reverence on this day. Finally, in blessed memory, the names of members of our congregation who died in this past year. Gloria Kuchminski, Carolyn Lord, Hannah Miller, Bill Whittington, sacred to us in our memories. For these we remember on this day.
Please share with me now in our litany of remembrance. I'll offer the plain text, and you will respond in the bold text. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them.
In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them.
In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them.
When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them.
When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them.
So long as we live, they too shall live.
For they are now a part of us as we remember them.
It is the ritual of giving and receiving that makes a community resilient. Those people we name aloud today and remember, the people who sat where we sit and sang the songs we are singing. Those who came before gave of themselves to create and sustain a place that could hold the coming together of our lives. And in the many ways that we give of ourselves in this beloved place, we honor them. Through the ritual of giving and receiving, we make community resilient, able to hold our pain, able to remind us of possibility. Let us now give and receive the offering.
As our service began today, I invited you to call to mind some person you have loved and lost. I invited you to imagine that person at the center of a circle, surrounded by those who share in the sense of both love and loss. Now I invite you to imagine that person once again. And this time, to imagine what is the most loving, most life-affirming thing that person would say to you. What would he want you to know? What would she share with you? What message affirming you might they offer? Please be seated.